Hello, DevOps professional. So I wanted to go through a demo I made for an interview. And yes, it was at Arista Network. So I wanted to make a pane of glass for this interview. And the pane of glass is usually used by, it's a term used by customers when they want to see the status of devices. So in this case, I only had one switch to work with. And I host that switch on ESXi. So this pane of glass will show the current time in Pacific PST. I'll show the version of EOS on the Arista switch, the uptime, the boot time, and the uptime's been a while now. That's when the first interview happened for me. And then I was demoing how I could change this stuff using Ansible because the team that wanted to hire me wanted Ansible to work. So to really embellish this, I was going to have this working with voice commands. I did get this to work. I can record voice from here. I can play it back, but I don't have a speech-to-text feature working yet. At any rate, from this web page, I can look at the EOS logs, the last 5 entries on the var log, EOS log, which I'll port back to this web page, and I can also enter EOS commands from here, and I'll get back a JSON representation from the switch. So that's kind of handy. Anyway, to make this pane of glass work, how did I do that? Well, there's 3 parts to it. And the first part really is hosting the switch. So in my case, I downloaded the laboratory switch VMDK from Arista Networks. And I put that here on this VM. And sure enough, I can jump on here and do things as administrator, which is nice. But let's go over how this was set up in VMware. So I think I can do a edit on this thing. I see it right here. And yeah, so here are the settings I used for this. This hard disk size is dictated by the VMDK which you use, so you don't need to change that. I'm simply on the VM network for the network. I don't use a CD drive. And it's pretty simple, really. The hard disk one is the VMDK file, which is right there in my data store one. So that's all you need for that. Memory. What did I use here for memory? Interesting. I think I used there it is. I think I used only 2 gigabytes, which isn't much. CPU, only 1 CPU. So that's the basic settings of this thing. And then you want to boot it up and configure it. So the hard part when you're not familiar with EOS is the one-touch configuration. It'll want to DHCP an address from a DHCP server, or you can set it manually. And I think I set it manually. So that's how that worked. Now, to make this pane of glass work, you have to write some JavaScript on the web server side. On the browser side, it's going to talk to the, in my case, I'm using a Flask backend. So here's the Flask backend that I wrote, and this is just a bit of Python. It's not all that hard, but you can see that every 10 seconds I'm getting pulled by my web browser locally here. So this is my IP address of my Mac OS here on my local computer. This also is being exported through port 8080. And so anybody on the internet can grab this thing. I was hoping the manager of this job would take an interest in this demo. That doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Okay, so to get this demo going then, you want to put in Flask and the template redirect request. So you can talk to an Arista switch two ways, using requests or using their own package. So they tend to use this pyeapi, and I was trying to get the speech recognition to work. So for this pyeapi, you have to load a configuration file, which I've loaded here, and that has passwords and such in there. So I can show you that. You want to have this little config file here. And for that config file, I just put in the switch name, the transport, which I should use HTTPS, but I'm not set up for that right now. So the username, privilege 15, the password, and the enable password. You can see that this is a very secure choice of passwords. Okay, so back to the real code here. So you want to put endpoints in here to talk to this thing. So I'm going through this slow enough that you can most likely type the code out. I'm also going to put it into GitHub, so if anybody wants to try this thing, they can try it out. So here's the function where I'm sending commands to the switch. I'm using the eAPI interface and this URL, which is secure, which is interesting. And then you have to massage this to put the command in the format that eAPI expects in the packet and send it. So that's one way to send commands to the switch. And then I want to look at the result back. If the command worked, I'll get back one result, and if it didn't work, I'll get back an error. So the trick here is you want to not fail in the error and simply return back something to the user. So I did some time conversions here to make the time in a more friendly format to display it on the web page. Now this get version command to the switch gets a whole bunch of things. It gets the version, and there's a lot of fields that it also can be returned, so I decode all those. And then here's where we get the log from EOS, and this is kind of sneaky how I did it. So I have a cron job on the switch running every so often with a bash user, and I'm simply copying the log file to the bash user, and then I'll bring it over here to temp and call it EOS. So that's kind of sneaky how I had to make that work, but it did work. And then I'll return the log file. So I'm running this thing on Mac OS, and I will connect to this thing as bash user. I'll pull that log file over, and then I will save it here locally. So here on the switch, it's located here under bash user on the switch. I'll put that in temp EOS on this Mac here, and then I'll open it as a read. I'll read it, and then I'll simply replace all the new lines with a paragraph to make it look neat, and I'll return it to the application using JSON, and that's how that works. So now here's the basic slash where you would return the entire index file. And so how was this index file made? I made this using Bootstrap Studio. I'll show you that in a minute. So this part will run the command that fills the entire screen. So this is not the ad hoc command. This is basically a list of commands that I run to fill everything on the pane of glass. So for that, I have a list of commands that I want to run, and I run those, and I return them. And I was doing some experimenting here. But here's the list of commands that I run to fill the pane of glass. So I have a commands list here, and I'll run all of these in turn. And there's a simple list here that I'll simply go through and run the commands, get the result, and append it to a list. And I'll do a conversion on the time. And then once this is done, I return this list, and I'm polling every 10 seconds. And that's basically how that works. So I've been experimenting with voice to text. This is not working yet. And I want to process the audio into a command. That's in case you didn't have a keyboard and you had a phone and you had to do a command to the switch in an emergency. You could do it that way. So that's how this works. I don't want Chrome or a browser caching the results, so I try to turn the cache off there. Okay, so the third part of this is actually the front end. And here is a program I use to design the front end. I'm not sure who wrote this program, but it's for sale commercially. It doesn't cost a lot. I think I paid $60 for this thing for a lifetime license a few years ago when I was in Boston. So at any rate, I'll go through how this works. And this is kind of handy how it works. So you can quickly sketch together a front end with this program. And to make this look neat, well, okay, let's go through how this works. In Bootstrap Studio and Bootstrap, you have the concept of sections and containers. I'm not sure why it evolved that way. Maybe you want to ask Twitter, but that's how it evolved. So here basically are constructs you can drag into the artwork here and make them work. This part down here is actually the build of the running program. So of interest to us really is this section area and the container. So if you expand all of this out, you kind of get a view of how all this works here. And so I've simply set up rows and columns to hold this stuff and make it look neat on the page. And each of these items here, when you click on them, you'll see they'll expand down here, and you can see this little paragraph lives in a column, and then you'll see it's a paragraph, and then each paragraph has a name attached to it. Well, that one doesn't because I've been using it as a text box, but this one would, I would think. Let's see. Down to the paragraph, there we go, IP4 name servers. So that's what I call it. Now, you might say, okay, this is all well and good, but how are you pulling the page every 10 seconds or so? And of course, this is really for displaying things that you want to reference in JavaScript. So with this program, you can call JavaScript, and you can write JavaScript. So let's go into that now. So I did use this code from something I wrote about 3 or 4 years ago, a pane of glass for a different project, but the JavaScript basically is reused from that, and I did some modifications to it. So here is the JavaScript here. Double click on it. It will come up, and I'm using jQuery, so I'm not using React or anything fancy. I'm using old tried and true jQuery here. So when you use jQuery and you have the document starting, this function will call, and then you go on from there. So all this command really does is saying you have an entity here. One of these boxes is called text input, and that most likely is going to be this one here. And so when you get text input, you're going to have a text method, and you're going to enter this text here, type in the command right here when this thing starts up. So that's how that works. I was working on the audio recorder here, but I commented it out because it won't work without a cert. It will throw an error, so I had to comment all that out. And when we go down here then, I was still trying to send audio blobs. That didn't work out. So anyway, this part here, we do a get switch status on the switch, and we get the EOS log. Those are initially when the program starts or the web browser reloads, and then here we're doing a set interval function. And so a set interval means we're going to run for 10,000 milliseconds here, which is about 10 seconds. And when we fire that, this set interval will fire and call the body here every 10 seconds. And that's going to call two functions, get switch status and get the log. So really that's all that matters in this bunch of code here. And then I have some asynchronous things at work. So when you click the send it to EOS button, which is this one here, that through the magic of jQuery and this click function thing here is going to call the endpoint, which is this EOS command right here. So it's going to call the EOS endpoint. And that's how that will work. There's more audio recorder stuff that I didn't really use. Capture voice. I was really trying to get this voice capture to work and don't have that working yet. So here's this display switch status. So basically all these boxes here have a name, and I get back one big long JSON string from the Flask application, the Flask backend. And once again, here's the Flask backend where we're returning the switch JSON here. Here's the switch status here. And you can see this big long list is returned. So the first thing we got to do is decode the list. What position on the list is the dictionary. And so let's go back and look at that. So here we see that this coming back is all indexed as to the position on the list. 0th position of the dictionary, or 1 or 2. Then when you decode dictionary keys with this method here in jQuery, you want to use this dot, and this dot here, this variable will correspond to the key in the dictionary. And of course here we see there's one key called clock source, and then embedded in that is another dictionary called local, or another key called local. So first key and second key, and this is probably a part of a dictionary. The first key has a dictionary, and this key will give you the local from that first dictionary. So that's how this works. Basically, this part took me like an hour to write. It's a little confusing to make it go. So let's see, switch status. What are we doing here? So this actually then makes the call to this endpoint here, get switch status, and then when it's done, we'll get the data and we'll stringify it and we'll attempt to parse it. So that's how that works, and then it looks like I returned that back. Let's see, no, I didn't use a return on that, but this endpoint here, get switch status, would be one of these right here. So that's a very important, and that returns this entire huge list. And of course you want to catch the errors. Okay, and so here, yeah, here's where I display it right here, display switch status. So this is really called by the interval, and we're grabbing status here. We do all the AJAX stuff to get this thing, and then we'll call a display function, which makes it a bit easier to work on. This basically is the function when the button's clicked. I'll send the command to EOS. And I found that I could run a condensed version of this AJAX command with this get JSON that sends a get to it. And I could run the command this way and get a response back and then log it. And then fill the text box here, which command response, which is right here. So that worked out very well. So I think the rest of this was code that I'd used in a previous project, which I thought I might need, so I didn't get rid of it, but I guess it's all still there. So that's how this works in general. I hope this was helpful to you if you're going to make a pane of glass on a switch. I will post this up to GitHub and leave the GitHub URL in the YouTube comments. Okay? So thanks for watching, and if you're going to make a pane of glass, this should make it a lot easier to produce for you. You might end up with something like this. You might want to display a lot of switches on here, or just one, or just a few, but that's how to do this, okay? Thanks for watching. Have a great day.